I think the biggest mistake people make about being heavily sedated is thinking you're completely out of it, like you're just a lump of meat sleeping off a hangover. That's not how it works. Not always. I was in the ICU, intubated. They had me on a cocktail of drugs that should have had me floating somewhere near Mars, but I was tethered. Maybe it was the fever, maybe it was the panic, but there was this thread of consciousness, thin as a spider silk, that just wouldn't snap. Most of the time, it was just noise. The rhythmic hiss-click of the ventilator, the beep-beep-beep of the monitors, the squeak of nurses' shoes. It was like being underwater, everything muffled and distorted. But then, sometimes, the distortion would clear, and a voice would cut through. It was Matt. He was talking to the doctor, I could tell. His voice was low, careful, the kind of voice you use when you're pretending to be strong, but you're falling apart inside. I felt a sudden, sharp jolt of hope. He was there. He was fighting for me. I tried to move my hand, tried to make a sound, anything to let him know I could hear him. I couldn't even twitch a finger. Then I heard the words that absolutely shattered that thread of hope and replaced it with a cold, terrifying dread. The doctor was talking about my organs, how they were struggling, and then Matt said it, so clearly, so calmly. I know. Look, doctor, if she can't come back from this, if there's no quality of life left for her. He took a shaky breath. I heard him swallow. We need to let her go. Let her go. The words echoed in that hollow space where my mind was trapped. Let her go. It wasn't a whisper. It was a statement. A surrender. My husband, the man who promised, "Till death do us part," was signing off on my death certificate. And I was right there, trapped inside my own body, listening to him make the decision. All the noise, the beeping, the ventilator, it all faded. The world was just that sound. Let her go. A panic like I'd never known hit me. This wasn't some distant risk anymore. This was a clock ticking down, and the only person who could stop it was the one who just started it. No, I wasn't ready to go. I hadn't even said goodbye to my kids. I hadn't told Matt he was wrong. I started fighting the drugs. It was purely an internal battle, like trying to swim through wet concrete. I poured every ounce of my will, my fear, my anger, into trying to move. Anything. Wiggle a toe. Flutter an eyelid. I focused on the monitor, the lines showing my heart rate. I knew what I needed to do. I needed to prove to them, to Matt, that there was someone home, that I was fighting. I focused on making my heart race. I pushed my terror into my chest, willing my body to react. I don't know how long I lay there, maybe seconds, maybe hours, pouring all my life force into a single goal. Wake up. I fought the drugs. I fought the fever. I fought my husband's decision. I needed to make a noise. I needed to move that damn needle on the monitor. I needed them to see me. And then, through the haze, I felt a sharp, burning pain in my chest, and the monitors started to shriek. The steady beep-beep turned into a furious, high-pitched alarm. I was awake enough to know I did it. I was in trouble, but I was seen. They rushed in. Matt's voice, now panicked, was the last thing I heard before the doctors plunged me deeper into sedation. What happened? Is she okay? I'm here, Matt. I'm here. And I heard you. That was the last thought I had before the dark took over again. And I knew, from that moment on, if I wanted to live, I couldn't trust anyone but myself. The darkness that followed was different. Before, it felt like a deep sleep. Now, it felt like being buried alive. I was aware of the silence, the forced, pharmacological silence that meant they had cranked up the juice to keep me down, but the fear was awake, and it was screaming. It wasn't the fear of dying anymore. Not exactly. It was the fear of being let go, of being dismissed. That feeling of absolute betrayal was 1,000 times sharper than any pain I had felt from the infection. I kept trying to break through. I'd focus on the memory of Matt's face when we first met, or the smell of my son's hair. Anything real, anything alive, just to give myself an anchor. And sometimes I'd see something. Flashes. Hallucinations, I suppose. I remember seeing a massive black swirling storm that kept trying to suck me into the middle. And then, a tiny hand, reaching out, pulling me back towards a sliver of light. My daughter. Always my daughter. I could still hear them talk around me occasionally. The nurses were quieter now, more professional. I heard terms like stable but non-responsive. Non-responsive. They thought I was gone. A shell. Then Matt came back. I knew his touch. When he squeezed my hand, I felt it, even through the sedation fog. It was a faint, warm pressure, and I knew I had to respond. This time, I didn't try to crash the monitors. I tried something quieter, something less dramatic. I focused all my energy on the small muscle that controls the movement of the eyelid. Just one flicker. I imagined opening a heavy vault door with my mind. I pushed and pushed and pushed against the chemical handcuffs they had slapped on my brain. The struggle was excruciating. It felt like my head was splitting open. But then, I felt a tiny, almost imperceptible twitch. I don't know if Matt saw it. I don't know if he felt it. But he started talking. "Look, I know you're mad at me. I heard the monitor. You scared the crap out of us, honey. But you have to know. I was just saying what they were saying. I can't live without you. I just couldn't watch you suffer." He started crying. I could hear his muffled sobs right beside my ear. And in that moment, the pure rage I felt started to soften. He was scared. He was broken. Maybe his words weren't a judgment against me, but a plea for his own pain to stop. It was the darkest, most terrible love, maybe, but it was still love. I couldn't forgive him yet, not fully. But I knew I needed to survive for us, not just for me. I focused again on my eyelid. One more push. This time, I felt the air hit my eyeball. A genuine, conscious, deliberate blink. Matt gasped. His crying stopped instantly. Did you see that, doctor?" he shouted. "She blinked. I know she blinked." The doctor's voice was skeptical. "It was probably just a reflex, Mr. T." But Matt didn't let go of my hand. He held it tightly. "Blink again, honey. Blink for me if you can hear me. Blink if you know I'm here." I gathered everything I had left. Every memory of the beach. Every promise. Every prayer. And I blinked again. It was slow. It was heavy. But it was real. A wave of exhaustion unlike anything I've ever known crashed over me, pulling me back down into the darkness. But this time, the darkness was different. It wasn't a burial. It was a rest. Because the last thing I heard was the doctor, sounding genuinely stunned, saying, "Get her off the maximum sedative protocol. She's fighting us. She's coming back." I was heard. I was seen. I had a chance. And I had a husband who, despite his terrifying mistake, was now fighting with me. The reduction in the sedatives felt like a heavy coat being slowly removed in a heat wave. I was still groggy, still floating, but the world wasn't muffled anymore. Sounds were sharper, the voices were clearer, and the pain, oh, the pain was definitely clearer. They had done a lot to me while I was out. Tubes, drains, monitors everywhere. The feeling of the breathing tube in my throat was the worst. It was a constant, gagging presence, an intruder that prevented me from speaking, from clearing my throat, from letting them know exactly how much I wanted it out. But I was awake, and I was plotting. My primary mission was communicating. I was tired of being a patient, tired of being a body they just poked and measured. I needed them to see me as a person again, a person with a fierce will. I started small, wiggling my toes, then trying to squeeze the nurse's hand back when she checked my grip strength. A thumbs up when they asked if I was in pain. Simple, tiny victories. The nurse, a kind woman named Brenda, noticed everything. She was the first one to truly treat me like I was fully conscious. "You're making incredible progress, honey," she whispered while adjusting my pillow. "You're a fighter. That husband of yours, he's a wreck, but he's here every day. Matt." The memory of his words was still a cold knot in my stomach. The anger hadn't completely dissipated, but the clarity had. He was terrified. I was terrifying. He walked in that afternoon looking utterly exhausted. His hair was messy, his eyes red-rimmed. He didn't rush in with the usual loud greeting. He walked slowly to the bedside, tentative. "Hey," he whispered, sitting down and gently taking my hand. He didn't squeeze hard this time. It was a respectful hold. "I know you can hear me better now." I blinked slowly, looking right into his eyes. I wanted him to see the accusation, the pain, the knowledge. He didn't flinch. He just held my gaze and started talking, his voice breaking. About what I said when I talked to the doctor. I wasn't thinking right. I saw the numbers, and they looked so bad. And I panicked. I thought that was the only loving thing I could do, to end the suffering. I am so sorry. I know you're fighting. And I was wrong to ever doubt you. He brought my hand to his forehead, burying his face there. I love you. Don't leave us, please. He was raw. He was truly broken. It was the apology I needed, but I still couldn't speak. The tube was a tyrant. I had to respond. I had to let him know what was true and what wasn't. I looked at him. Then I used the one thing I could control, my tears. A single hot tear rolled down my temple. It wasn't a cry of sadness, but one of complicated relief. Forgiveness was going to be a long road, but the truth was out in the open. Matt wiped the tear away with his thumb. Okay, I get it. You're giving me a break, but you're not letting me off the hook. He managed a weak smile. I deserve that. I'll earn your trust back. Just keep fighting, okay? I blinked once, firmly. Yes, that was the turning point. From that moment, Matt wasn't just a visitor. He was my second set of eyes, my voice, my protector, and I was finally ready to start the real grueling work of coming back to life. I just needed that tube out. I needed my voice, and I needed to know what the hell actually put me here. The moment of clarity, the blink, the tears, the silent reconciliation with Matt didn't magically fix the breathing tube. That thing was still the most invasive, gag-inducing obstruction in my life. Every conscious minute was dedicated to getting it out. The doctors had a process. They called it weaning. They'd lower the machine's support, seeing if my own lungs would take over the job. But every time they tried, I'd panic. I'd feel that drowning sensation creep back, and the monitor would start screeching, demanding the machine breathe for me again. It's one thing to fight your husband's judgment. It's another to fight your own body's survival reflex. One morning, Dr. Ramirez, the kind but serious attending physician, came in. Matt was there, holding my hand, now acting as my translator. We need to try again, Sarah, Dr. Ramirez said gently. Your brain is awake. Your body needs to catch up. But we can't risk re-intubating you. If you panic, we put you back on full support. I blinked once for okay. I understand. Tell him, Matt. I tried to communicate with my eyes. Tell him I need to know why this happened. I need a reason to breathe. Matt looked at my face, focused, and then turned to the doctor. She wants to know the full diagnosis. She needs information. She's not a passive patient. Dr. Ramirez paused, impressed. All right. The short version, Sarah, is that you had a very aggressive, very fast-moving bacterial infection. We believe it was an antibiotic-resistant strain that led to septic shock. That's why your organs were failing. The good news is, we caught the infection and hit it hard. The bad news is, the damage to your lungs was severe. You have a long road to recovery. Sepsis. Antibiotic-resistant. The words hit me hard, even in my foggy state. I knew enough about hospitals to know that was serious. That was life and death roulette. But the information, the why, was exactly the fuel I needed. This wasn't some random, cruel twist of fate. It was a battle against a specific, microscopic enemy. I looked at Matt, and then back at the doctor. I closed my eyes, took a long, internal breath, and then gave the doctor a slow, deliberate thumbs up. Let's do this. The nurse, Brenda, came in and started the process. The ventilator suddenly felt weaker. The air coming in was less forced. It was terrifying. I felt a cold sweat break out on my skin. My chest tightened. Breathe. Just one breath. I fought the urge to thrash or signal distress. I focused on the hiss-click of the machine and tried to match its rhythm, forcing my diaphragm to work. 1 second. 2 seconds. My lungs burned. Then, Matt leaned close to my ear. He didn't say fight or breathe. He whispered something completely different. The kids made you a drawing. It's a rainbow, and they spelled out mom backwards. You need to come home and teach them how to spell. It was such a stupid, mundane, normal thing, and it broke the panic. It tethered me not just to life, but to the absurdity of everyday life. I inhaled, a ragged, painful, but my own breath. The nurse looked at the monitor, then at me, then back at the monitor. The alarm didn't go off. She's doing it, Brenda whispered, smiling brightly. Keep it up, honey. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The doctor watched, silent. Finally, Dr. Ramirez nodded, a huge sense of relief washing over his face. Okay, that's enough for today. Excellent job, Sarah. We'll try again tomorrow, but I think we can get this tube out soon. It wasn't victory yet, but for the first time since that terrifying moment I heard Matt surrender, I felt a deep, powerful sense of control. I was coming back, one agonizing breath at a time, and I wasn't leaving until I found out where that antibiotic-resistant strain came from. That part of the confession was yet to come. The tube finally came out 2 days later. It was painful, violent, and immediately, blissfully clarifying. The first thing I did wasn't to speak Matt's name or thank the doctors. The first thing I did was cough, a deep, wrenching, ragged sound that felt like tearing wallpaper off my lungs. But after the cough came the voice. It was weak, raspy, barely a squeak, but it was mine. "Water," I croaked. Brenda laughed, a genuine warm sound. "We have water, and you, Sarah, are a medical miracle. Welcome back to the land of the living." Matt was leaning against the wall, utterly speechless, his eyes glistening. He looked like a man who'd just seen his own ghost walk into the room. "Honey," he managed, his voice thick. "I heard you," I whispered, the words scratching my raw throat. I didn't want to waste this hard-won voice on platitudes. I needed to establish the new reality. He flinched, physically recoiling as if I'd struck him, his face drained of color. "I know, and I've been waiting for you to say that. Can we talk about it when you're stronger?" I shook my head slowly, feeling the immense fatigue already settling in. "Now." Brenda quietly slipped out, giving us privacy. The silence in the room, without the constant ventilator hiss, was heavy. "I need you to understand," Matt started, his gaze fixed on the floor. "I wasn't trying to abandon you. The doctors, Dr. Ramirez, he made it sound like the infection was winning. He said the chances of waking up without severe, permanent damage were slim. I couldn't bear the thought of you spending your life hooked up to machines. I thought I was making a loving decision to free you from pain. But you didn't ask me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You took away my fight. You signed the papers for me." "There were no papers," he insisted, looking up, his eyes pleading. It was a verbal conversation, what we'd want if the next few hours were critical. And I messed up. I know I did. Seeing you fight that tube, fighting those drugs, that's when I realized how badly I misunderstood you. You never quit. Not ever. He reached for my hand again, and this time, I let him take it. The anger was still there, a simmering coal, but the overwhelming sense of dread was gone. He wasn't a monster. He was just a terrified husband who made a terrible call under impossible pressure. "The kids miss you," he said softly, changing the subject, knowing the weight of my gaze. "They ask about the boo-boos. They think you're getting fixed like a toy." That pulled me back. The thought of my children, their messy drawings, their misspellings, their utter dependence on me, was the most potent medicine. "I'm going home," I stated, the first real command I'd given in weeks. "We are," Matt corrected me, smiling, a genuine exhausted smile. "But first, we need to know what you remember about before. The diagnosis was that antibiotic-resistant strain. Were you exposed to anything unusual before you came in?" I searched my memory. The pre-sepsis life. It felt like a lifetime ago. The pain, the fever, the sudden crash. What could it have been? A trip? Food? I don't know, I rasped, frustration swelling. "It was so fast." "Think," Matt urged gently. "Doctor, Ramirez said most community-acquired resistance comes from contact in places like nursing homes, maybe another hospital visit, even a dirty piece of equipment somewhere." Another hospital. My mind snagged on the idea. I had only been in one other medical facility recently, just before I got sick. A quick in-and-out procedure that felt totally benign at the time. "The dentist," I whispered, the memory suddenly flooding back. I had a root canal done the week before. They used some kind of irrigation kit. That was the only contact. Matt's eyes widened. He looked from me to the hospital room door, then back to me, an almost fearful realization dawning on his face. A root canal? The week before? Honey, if that was it, that's a massive liability. That's how these things spread. He squeezed my hand, not in support, but with a new, urgent purpose. "We need to tell the doctor. Right now." The battle for my life was won, but the real confession, the root of the sickness, was just about to turn into a full-blown investigation. Matt didn't wait for permission. He hit the call button, not for the nurse, but using the emergency red button on the wall. Within 30 seconds, Brenda was back, looking alarmed, and Dr. Ramirez followed shortly after. Matt didn't waste time. He launched into the information, holding my hand tight the entire time. His focus completely shifted from emotional turmoil to clinical urgency. "Doctor, Sarah just remembered something crucial. The week before she crashed, she had a root canal, a procedure involving irrigation. Could that be the source? Could the sepsis have started there, from an infected tool or poor sterilization? It was an antibiotic-resistant strain, right?" Dr. Ramirez's calm, professional demeanor visibly stiffened. She walked over to the foot of the bed, her eyes serious. "It's certainly a possibility, Matt. Any invasive procedure carries a risk of introducing bacteria into the bloodstream, especially dental work, which is notoriously difficult to keep completely sterile. If the equipment wasn't properly sterilized, or if the water lines were contaminated, a biofilm, yes, that could absolutely be the mechanism for a resistant strain to enter her system and cause this level of sepsis." I watched them talk, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying precision. The rapid onset, the severity, it wasn't just bad luck, it was negligence. "We need to know the specific name of the bacteria," Matt pressed, "and we need to know the name of that dental practice. We have to report this, doctor, for the sake of other patients." Dr. Ramirez nodded slowly. "First things first, Matt. We focused on treating the infection, not necessarily tracking its source. The microbiology lab will have the specifics of the strain. I'll call them immediately and have them confirm the exact resistance profile and the likely origin. As for the dental office, we can't legally investigate or report that ourselves, but we must notify the state health department." "Notify them," I rasped, trying to push more air past my recovering vocal cords. "They need to shut it down." It felt strange, speaking my first full sentence out loud after days of silence, and having it be an order for regulatory action. But I wasn't just Sarah, the patient, anymore. I was Sarah, the victim, and I had proof of where the bomb had been planted. Matt squeezed my hand again, but this time it was different. It was a partnership. "We're going to handle this, honey. You focus on getting your strength back. We'll handle the investigation." The doctor and Brenda left the room, the conversation having transformed the atmosphere from critical care to detective work. Matt pulled a chair right up next to me, his expression grim. "I need the details," he said, pulling out his phone. "The name of the dentist, the date, everything." I told him the name of the clinic, a sterile, corporate-looking place near his office, and the exact date of the procedure. As I spoke, the exhaustion hit me again, heavy and immediate. The physical effort of talking, coupled with the emotional weight of this discovery, was too much. My eyes started drooping. Matt noticed immediately. He put his phone down and gently stroked my hair. "Sleep now," he said, his voice soft, almost fatherly. "I've got the information. I'll make the calls. You just focus on the next breath, okay? The fight is outside this room now, and you did your part. You're coming home." I closed my eyes, letting the fatigue claim me. But this sleep was different too. There was no fear of betrayal, no spectral storm trying to pull me under. There was only the sound of Matt's even breathing beside me, and the quiet, fierce knowledge that I hadn't just survived a bacterial infection. I had survived a human mistake, and I was going to make sure that mistake never hurt anyone else. The confession was out. The counterattack had begun. The hours that followed felt like a slow-motion relay race. I was the anchor, trying to rest and repair, while Matt was the runner, handling the outside world. He stepped out several times, returning with the grim resolution of someone who'd just gone 10 rounds with a lawyer or a health official. The first major confirmation came later that evening. Dr. Ramirez returned, looking much less relaxed. She carried a sheet of paper from the lab. "The strain is Pseudomonas aeruginosa," she stated, her voice low. "And yes, it shows resistance to our first-line antibiotics. The profile strongly suggests a nosocomial or facility-based exposure, meaning it was likely acquired in a healthcare setting." I closed my eyes, a wave of nausea hitting me. A contaminated dental line. It wasn't just a hypothesis anymore. It was practically a lock. I had gone in for a minor procedure and nearly died because someone had cut corners on sterilization. "And the dental office?" Matt's voice was sharp. "We notified the Department of Health," the doctor confirmed. "They have protocols. They will investigate the facility, test the water lines, and review sterilization procedures. That process, however, takes time. It won't be immediate." "Time we didn't have," Matt muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. He looked at me, a silent promise in his eyes. He wasn't waiting for the state bureaucracy. "Sarah," Dr. Ramirez continued, her voice softening, "we need to talk about next steps. We'll move you out of the ICU and into a step-down unit tomorrow. You're stable, but the long-term recovery, the fatigue, the rebuilding of your lungs, that starts now. We've arranged for physical therapy." It was a flood of reality. Physical therapy, long-term recovery, the massive, gaping hole this whole ordeal had blown in our lives. The life-or-death drama was over, replaced by the grind of getting better. "I need to see my kids," I rasped. It was a need stronger than food or sleep. "Tomorrow," Matt promised, his voice choked up. "In the new unit. They're so excited. They don't know any of this, honey. They just know Mom needs cuddles." That night, I didn't just sleep. I healed. The quiet determination in Matt's eyes, the clinical confirmation of the bacterial source, the promise of seeing my children. It was all better medicine than any IV drip. The move to the new room the next day felt like crossing a finish line. The beeping was less intense. The window was bigger. The emotional atmosphere was lighter. And then, the moment I'd fought for. The kids tumbled into the room, their faces radiating pure, unadulterated joy. My daughter, usually shy, ran straight to the bed and burrowed her face into my neck, careful not to hit any of the remaining lines. My son, the older one, stood back, his eyes wide. "Mommy, are you fixed?" he asked, his voice small. "I'm fixed, baby," I whispered, holding my girl tight. "I'm almost all the way fixed." They showed me the drawing Matt had mentioned. The rainbow, the backwards mom. It was beautiful chaos. It was the reason I fought. As the kids played quietly on the floor, Matt sat beside me, looking at the picture. He still looked exhausted, but his posture was different. He was anchored. I made a few more calls, he confessed quietly, running his thumb over my knuckles. "The Department of Health is sending an inspector, but I also called a friend who works in legal malpractice. We are filing a report against that dental clinic. Not just for us, Sarah, but to protect the public. They need to be held accountable for putting resistant bacteria out into the world." His admission, his confession of his actions, past and present, felt like a total restoration of our trust. He wasn't acting alone anymore. He was acting for us. "Good," I managed, a fierce satisfaction warming my chest. "Start there. I'll tell you the rest of the story later." He looked surprised. "The rest? What else could there possibly be?" I looked at the scars on my arms from the IV lines, the evidence of the war, the crazy things you hear when you're half dead, Matt, the hospital staff confessions, the things you only learn when you stop being a person and become a piece of equipment. The physical recovery had started, but the deep, dark secrets of the hospital, the ones I was privy to because of the sedatives and the silence, were just beginning to spill out. My time in the ICU was a gold mine of untold stories, and now I had my voice back. The transition from the ICU to the step-down unit felt less like a medical transfer and more like crossing the border into a different country. The tension was lower, the nurses smiled more, and there were actual windows that let in real sunlight. It was restorative, but the sudden quiet made the things I remembered from the abyss even louder. Matt brought me soup and held my hand, talking about the kids' school play. He was trying so hard to rebuild the normal, and I let him. For now. But the dark little secrets I collected were heavy, waiting to be shared. "You said you had more stories," Matt prompted that evening, after the kids had gone home. He was sorting my mountain of pills, and seemed nervous about what I might reveal next. "What did you mean? What did you hear while you were out?" I took a slow, painful breath, savoring the feeling of controlling my own lungs. It wasn't constant. It was just snatches when the drugs would wear down a bit. I heard the nurses talking. Not about me, necessarily. Just things. I leaned my head back against the pillow, focusing on one specific memory. I remember hearing two nurses, late at night. They were right outside my curtain, whispering. One of them, I think her name was Maria, was stressed about something. She was talking about a mistake. Matt stopped sorting pills. A medical mistake? On a patient? Yes, but not a big one. Not something life-threatening, I don't think. She was talking about an elderly man in the room across the hall, Mr. Peterson. They were supposed to give him a certain medication, but Maria got the timing wrong. She gave it too early or too late, I couldn't tell. She was terrified of writing it down in his chart. And what did the other nurse say? Matt asked, his voice low and concerned. She told Maria not to worry. She said, and I remember this exactly, just chart it as given on time. He's 90, nonverbal, and family only visits on Sundays. No one will ever check the precise log. The hassle of the paperwork and the internal review isn't worth a minor timing error, especially when he's stable. I watched Matt's face. He was horrified, but not surprised. The cold cynicism of exhausted professionals. So they were encouraging falsification of records, Matt stated flatly, to save themselves bureaucratic hassle. Exactly, I whispered. It was the casualness of it. They weren't bad people. They were just tired, overworked, and making a calculated risk that no one would notice a tiny lie for a man they considered to be already on his way out. It made me realize that even here, where they are fighting to save you, they're still just people making terrible choices. Matt rubbed his temples. That's terrifying, that they decide who is worth the paperwork. And then there was the doctor, I continued, pushing myself further. This was the harder one to tell. Not Dr. Ramirez. Another one. Younger. I paused, trying to gather the details. He was talking on his phone, leaning against the wall near the sink. He thought he was alone. He wasn't talking about a patient, but about a surgical tool, a very expensive new piece of equipment the hospital had just bought. What about it? He was complaining to his friend about how the hospital had forced them all to use it, even though they were still learning it. And then he said that a few weeks ago, during an evening surgery, he called it a rush job. He used the new equipment, and he thinks he nicked an artery, or damaged something he shouldn't have. He didn't know for sure, but the patient had complications later that night. Serious ones. Matt's grip tightened on the arm of his chair. Did he report it? I shook my head slowly, feeling the weight of the lie. No, he said. I covered it up in the summary, blamed it on pre-existing scar tissue. No one's going to question me on this expensive toy. It'll be my word against the patient's eventual complication. The room felt cold. The two confessions, the careless nurse, the arrogant doctor, painted a terrifying picture of institutionalized imperfection. My own survival felt less like a miracle and more like a statistical anomaly, a lucky escape from a system riddled with tiny, self-serving betrayals. That's why I had to wake up, Matt. I finished, my voice raspy with emotion. I heard too much. I knew too much. If I had stayed in that sedation, I would have just been another silent entry on a faked chart, another complication blamed on old age or scar tissue. I had to come back to tell the truth. Matt leaned forward, his face serious and close to mine. Thank you for telling me. Now, we don't just fight the dental clinic. We fight the silence. But first you rest. We have a lot of work to do. The gravity of those confessions settled over us like a shroud. We were no longer just a couple dealing with a health crisis. We were accidental whistleblowers. Matt spent the next morning quietly making calls from the corner of my room, his tone shifting from husband to advocate, sharp and demanding. He contacted the legal friend again, providing the details of the dental clinic and, hesitantly, the anecdotal accounts of the hospital's internal shortcuts, the charting error, the concealed surgical mistake. We need proof, Sarah, he explained, hanging up the phone, running a hand through his already messy hair. The dental clinic is traceable because we know the Pseudomonas strain is linked to an outside facility, but the internal stuff, the hospital will deny. It's just your word. But I heard it, Matt. I insisted, my voice gaining a tiny bit more strength each day. It happened. I believe you, he affirmed, squeezing my knee. But legally, we need more than a memory from a heavily sedated patient. The pressure of the outside fight was immense, but the internal fight, the physical recovery, was its own kind of torture. Every session with the physical therapist, a burly, cheerful man named Frank, was a reminder of how close I came to losing everything. Simple tasks, like sitting upright without dizziness or lifting a water bottle, felt monumental. Frank, unaware of the clandestine conversations happening in the room, was my lifeline to the present. He talked about baseball, the weather, anything to distract me from the burning in my chest when I tried to breathe deeply. You're using those lungs, Sarah, he'd say, clapping his hands. They've been through a war. You gotta rebuild the scaffolding. During one of these grueling sessions, while I was trying to walk the short distance to the door, a woman in a pale blue suit entered the room. She was crisp, professional, and wore a hospital ID badge that identified her as risk management. Matt immediately stiffened, stepping between me and the visitor. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice instantly cold. The woman offered a tight, practiced smile. "Mr. T, I'm Ms. Davies from administration. I just wanted to personally welcome Sarah to the step-down unit and check in on her care. It was a performance. I could smell the corporate spin from across the room. Our care has been fine," Matt said, not budging. "We were just about to talk about the bacterial strain, Pseudomonas aeruginosa, and the report we filed regarding a certain dental facility." Ms. Davies's smile didn't waver, but her eyes flickered with annoyance. "Ah, yes. We're fully cooperating with the state health department on that matter. We take patient safety very seriously." She approached my bedside, ignoring Matt's tension. "We understand your concerns, Sarah, and we are committed to providing whatever long-term care you need. We'd like to talk about getting you set up with a dedicated case manager to assist with insurance and future appointments. Also, the hospital would like to offer to waive all your outstanding copays and deductibles related to this admission." Matt scoffed. "A free hospital stay? Is this an admission of guilt, Ms. Davies? Are you trying to buy our silence before we bring up the dental clinic's role?" Ms. Davies finally dropped the practiced kindness. Her voice became steel. "It is simply a gesture of goodwill, Mr. T. This was a complex, aggressive infection. We pride ourselves on the quality of our care." "Now, if you'll excuse us, Sarah needs her rest." She looked directly at me, and in her eyes I saw a silent warning. "Take the money and disappear." I looked at Matt. We hadn't talked about seeking money. We talked about accountability. The offer wasn't a gesture of goodwill. It was a bribe. I found my voice, pushing Frank's advice about deep breaths out of my mind and replacing it with pure adrenaline. "Thank you, Ms. Davies," I managed, my voice still weak but steady. "But I think we'll wait on the offer. We have several outstanding questions regarding protocols inside this facility that we need answered first." I held her gaze. I was no longer sedated. I was no longer silent. She nodded once, sharply, realizing the bribery hadn't worked. "Very well. We'll be in touch." As soon as the door clicked shut, Matt turned to me, his jaw tight with triumph and fury. "They know. They're running damage control before the state even confirms the dental link. That's a huge tell." I looked at Frank, who was standing awkwardly near the equipment, pretending to be intensely interested in my heart rate monitor. "Matt," I said quietly, "we just became the problem. We need to get out of here." The hospital's quiet campaign to cover its tracks had begun, and I knew I couldn't truly recover until I was physically free from the building holding those dark secrets and trying to buy my silence. The encounter with Ms. Davies solidified everything. The hospital wasn't just a place of healing. It was a corporation with liabilities, and I was now a massive talking liability. The very air in the step-down unit suddenly felt less restorative and more claustrophobic. "We need to accelerate the discharge," I told Matt, resting back against the pillows after Frank had left, whistling awkwardly. "I can't recover here. I feel watched." "I agree," Matt said, pacing the small room. "But we have to do it right. If we rush, they'll use it against us later. Say we left against medical advice, and complicate the insurance or the legal case. I'll talk to Dr. Ramirez tomorrow. We'll push for home health care." The next few days were a blur of intense physical therapy and escalating paranoia. I pushed my body relentlessly, using the rage from Ms. Davies' bribe as fuel. I walked the length of the hallway, slowly and painfully, demanding to prove I was stable enough to leave. Matt, meanwhile, was fighting the bureaucratic war. He spent hours on the phone, coordinating with the legal contact and the Department of Health. The health inspector had confirmed a visit to the dental clinic was scheduled, but the results would take time. The internal secrets I held, however, were proving difficult to move forward with. My legal contact advised us that unless there was physical evidence, a photo of the wrong medication, a witness to the surgical cover-up, my account was too easily dismissed as drug-induced delirium by the hospital's powerful legal team. "They'll use the sedation against you, Sarah," Matt reported, looking defeated. "They'll say you were dreaming." "But I wasn't dreaming," I protested, my voice cracking. "I heard that doctor. He was bragging about hiding his mistake. I can still hear the smugness in his voice." The frustration was immense. My life was nearly ended by negligence, and the system was built to protect the negligent. The breakthrough came unexpectedly, late one afternoon. Brenda, my favorite nurse, came in to check my vitals. She looked tired and drawn, but her kindness was genuine. "You're leaving tomorrow, I hear," she said, managing a smile. "I'm genuinely thrilled for you. You deserve to be home." "Thank you, Brenda," I replied. "You saved me more than once." I hesitated, then decided to take a risk. I had to know if the hospital gossip I overheard was real. "Brenda, I know this sounds strange, but when I was in the ICU, I heard things. I heard some staff talking about an error. Something about an elderly man, Mr. Peterson, and a charting error." Brenda's eyes darted nervously to the door, then back to me. Her smile vanished. She leaned in close, her voice barely audible. "Sarah, please, don't talk about that. I wasn't involved, but you need to forget what you heard in the ICU. People here are stressed. Things get misinterpreted." Her denial was too fast, too fearful. "Did they falsify the chart?" I pressed gently. "Did they?" She looked utterly tormented. She didn't answer with words. Instead, she adjusted the sheet covering my legs, her hands trembling slightly. "I need to go," she whispered, already backing toward the door. "Good luck, Sarah. Get well." As she reached the door, she stopped, her back to me. She didn't turn around, but she spoke one final rapid sentence. "Ask Matt to look up the case logs for any evening surgeries 2 weeks ago involving the new endoscopic stapler. Just look for any unusual patient transfers or complications." And then she was gone. Matt, who had been listening intently from his chair, stared at the closed door. "That wasn't denial," he said, pulling out his phone, his eyes blazing with a new focus. "That was a confession and a tip-off. She risked her job for you." "The endoscopic stapler," I repeated, the name of the equipment confirming the doctor's conversation. "She gave us the key. Now we find the patient." The fight had just escalated again. We were leaving the hospital the next morning, but we were taking its secrets with us. My discharge papers were signed, but our investigation was just beginning. The next morning, the day of my discharge, felt like a scene from a spy movie. Matt had spent the hours before dawn hunched over his laptop, navigating the hospital's public-facing databases and cross-referencing my vague timeline with any potential hits Brenda's tip provided. "The patient logs are heavily redacted," Matt murmured, sipping his awful hospital coffee. "But I found a record. 2 weeks ago, late Tuesday night, an unscheduled non-cardiac emergency surgery was performed. It involved an endoscopic procedure, and the patient was immediately transferred out of the operating room to an undisclosed floor for intensive monitoring. Not the ICU, but somewhere else. And here's the kicker. The patient's record shows they were initially brought in for a routine colonoscopy. A routine colonoscopy that escalated into emergency surgery involving a new, tricky piece of equipment. The pieces fit perfectly. The doctor's hurried, arrogant confession about the rush job and nicking something was about this person. "We need the name," I said, my voice still raspy, but imbued with a cold determination. "We need to find that patient and tell them what happened. I can't get the name from this system." Matt sighed, closing the laptop. "The hospital is tight. But the address of the clinic? The Pseudomonas source? That's traceable and verifiable. We focus on what we can prove outside first, then circle back to this internal mess later." Dr. Ramirez signed my discharge papers without fanfare. She gave me firm instructions about pulmonary recovery and warned me again about the intensity of the fatigue I would face. I thanked her sincerely. She was one of the good ones. The physical act of leaving the hospital was jarring. Being wheeled out of the unit, past the silent closed doors of the ICU, was a powerful final step in my battle. The sunlight, harsh and beautiful, hit my skin, and I felt the reality of my survival sink in. We drove home in silence. The house was a sanctuary, filled with the scent of pine cleaner and the chaotic love of my children, who had decorated the living room with welcome signs and balloons. That night, after the kids were asleep, Matt and I sat on the couch, the laptop open between us. The mood was less celebratory and more strategic. "The legal contact is ready," Matt said, pulling up a document. "We start with the dental clinic. It's the cleanest case. We use the lab results from Dr. Ramirez to prove the source of the infection and sue them for negligence and medical malpractice." "What about the money they offered?" I asked, recalling Ms. Davies' cold bribe. "We don't take it," Matt stated firmly. "It complicates the case and makes us look like opportunists. We want accountability." not a payout to disappear quietly. I looked at him, truly seeing the transformation. The terrified man who surrendered my life was gone. In his place was a partner, strong and focused. My near-death experience had, ironically, salvaged our marriage and given us a shared purpose more profound than just raising our family. "Start the process," I told him, resting my head on his shoulder. "Start with the dentist. But we can't forget Mr. Peterson and the patient with the endoscopic stapler. We survived to tell all these stories, Matt. We have to do it right." He kissed the top of my head. "We will. We're in this together now. You rest. I'll fight." The first chapter of the fight for my life, was over. But the next chapter, the fight for the truth and for justice against the systems that had failed me, was just beginning. And it started with a single, aggressive bacterial strain tracked back to a clean corporate dental office. I was home, but the hospital confessions were still ringing in my ears. The reality of recovery at home was a punch to the gut. The world outside the hospital was loud, bright, and exhausting. Simple tasks, walking up the stairs, folding laundry, or even just listening to my kids' excited chatter, drained me completely. The physical toll of the sepsis was far greater than I ever imagined, leaving me with a crushing fatigue and the feeling that my lungs were made of tissue paper. Matt was incredible. He managed the kids, the house, and now, the burgeoning legal war. Our living room, usually a spot for TV and toys, had become the war room, dominated by documents, legal pads, and endless phone chargers. The focus remained on the dental clinic. Our lawyer, a sharp woman named Eleanor, advised that the case against the clinic was their strongest leverage point. "The Pseudomonas is a smoking gun, Sarah," Eleanor explained over a video call. "It proves the injury came from an outside source related to their hygiene practices. That's negligence, plain and simple." The next week brought the first official result. The Department of Health inspector found significant deviations in the dental clinic's sterilization protocols, specifically regarding the water lines used for irrigation during root canals. The clinic was temporarily shut down for deep cleaning and mandatory staff retraining. When Matt told me, the victory was bittersweet. "We did it," I whispered, relief washing over me. "We stopped them from hurting someone else." "We did," Matt agreed, but his expression was grim. "But Eleanor says this only confirms negligence. It doesn't tell us how high up the failure goes. The clinic is claiming the Pseudomonas could have come from the city water supply, trying to deflect blame." "They're lying," I said, a wave of familiar anger rising, just like the nurses who falsified the chart and the doctor who blamed scar tissue. The internal confessions I carried became an obsession. I couldn't let go of Mr. Peterson or the patient with the endoscopic stapler. My survival felt meaningless if I didn't use it to expose the system's lies. "Matt, let's try the name search again," I pleaded. "Forget the legal databases. Try social media. The endoscopic stapler. We know it happened 2 weeks before I got sick. Try searching local news for emergency surgery complication in that time frame." Matt was hesitant, viewing this as a dangerous rabbit hole, but he saw the urgency in my eyes. He started typing. He found nothing in the news. The hospital, as expected, was a fortress protecting its reputation. "Okay," I muttered, frustration mounting. "Think about the lie. They blamed it on pre-existing scar tissue. Who would have pre-existing scar tissue from a colonoscopy that would cause an emergency transfer?" Matt scrolled back up to the vague hospital record he'd found days ago. He looked at the age listed on the patient transfer record. The patient was an older male, mid-60s. "Okay, try searching Facebook groups," I suggested. "Local community groups. Ask about a man in his 60s who went in for a routine colonoscopy a few weeks ago and had complications." It felt reckless, but we were out of official options. Matt posted a carefully worded inquiry in 3 large local community groups, asking if anyone knew of a family dealing with a sudden, serious complication after a routine non-emergency hospital procedure around that time. He omitted the name of the hospital, fearing it would trigger the risk management team. We waited, staring at the screen. The anxiety was palpable. 30 minutes later, the first comment popped up. It wasn't a name, but a question from a concerned neighbor. "Are you talking about Tom? Tom L? He had an awful time after his checkup at St. Jude's. His wife pulled the plug on his Facebook a few weeks ago. Said they were moving him to a long-term care facility, suddenly. Matt and I exchanged a look across the coffee table. St. Jude's. That was the hospital where I was treated. Moving him to a long-term care facility. That suggested permanent, life-altering damage. Tom L., Matt whispered, typing the name into a search engine. The results confirmed it. A local man, Thomas L., listed as having been a patient at St. Jude's. No direct mention of the surgery complication, but an abrupt, unexplained shift to a long-term care facility 2 weeks ago. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with my body temperature. The arrogant young doctor's cover-up wasn't just a hypothetical lie. It had ruined a man's life. We found him, I whispered, closing my eyes. The lie is real. We need to tell Eleanor. We need to tell Tom's family what happened to him. The dental clinic was the battle we were fighting for ourselves. Tom L's case was the battle we were fighting for the truth I had risked my life to hear. Finding Thomas L. felt like unlocking a door I wasn't meant to open. The immediate relief of confirming the truth I held was quickly replaced by a chilling realization. The cover-up was so effective that his own community didn't know the specifics of his fate. Matt immediately contacted Eleanor. Her reaction was electric. "This is exactly what we needed," Eleanor said on a rushed morning call. "The hospital can dismiss Sarah's testimony as delirium, but they can't dismiss a living, breathing patient whose life was ruined exactly how Sarah predicted. This moves the internal issues from gossip to evidence." The problem remained access. Tom L. was in a long-term care facility, meaning he was likely severely compromised, possibly nonverbal, just like Mr. Peterson. Getting his medical records would be a nightmare, requiring legal maneuvering and the full cooperation of his family. "We need to contact his wife," I insisted. "We can't just file subpoenas. We have to tell her what we know. We owe her that much." Matt hesitated. "Telling her is risky. She might tip off the hospital's risk management team, and they'll bury Tom's file forever. Or," I countered, looking at the faint surgical scars on my own arm, "she might be desperately searching for answers, and we are the only people who have them. What would you have done, Matt, if you were the one searching for the truth about me?" That settled it. Matt, using the community group tip-off, managed to find a current private number for Tom L.'s wife, Martha. I was too weak to handle the conversation myself. The conversation, the emotional weight of delivering this kind of news, had to be Matt's burden. I sat beside him on the sofa, clutching his hand as he made the call. The conversation was excruciatingly slow. Matt introduced himself carefully, explaining that his wife had been a patient at St. Jude's and had overheard some conversations during her recovery from a near-fatal infection linked to surgical equipment. Martha L., his voice, audible even through the phone, was thin and brittle with exhaustion. "I don't know who you are," she said, her voice shaking, "but they told me it was complications. They told me it was his pre-existing condition. They said it was just bad luck." "Mrs. L.," Matt said gently, "I need to tell you what my wife heard. We believe the complications weren't due to bad luck. We believe they were due to a mistake made during the procedure, and that mistake was covered up using the excuse of scar tissue." The phone line went silent for a long, agonizing moment. Then Martha's voice came back, sharper, tinged with disbelief and fierce desperation. "The doctor, Dr. C., he kept talking about pre-existing adhesions. He said Tom's body just couldn't handle the colonoscopy, but Tom was healthy. He went in for a checkup." Tears sprang to my eyes. The details matched perfectly. The specific, calculated lie. "We believe Dr. C used a new endoscopic stapler," Matt continued, maintaining his calm, professional tone, "and he may have caused an injury that led to the emergency transfer. If he hid that error, it means you have been fighting this for weeks without the full truth." Martha broke down, sobbing into the phone. "I knew it. I knew they were lying. He's paralyzed, Mr. T. He's totally paralyzed and can't speak, and they keep saying it was unavoidable. They gave me this huge package of paperwork and offered to cover all the bills, but they made me sign this non-disclosure form, the bribe, the exact same tactic Ms. Davies had used on us. We got the same offer," I whispered to Matt, urging him on. "Tell her not to sign anything else. Mrs. L., my wife and I were offered the same kind of financial arrangement to keep quiet," Matt said. "You need to call a lawyer immediately. We have the internal hospital evidence, my wife's direct testimony, to back up your case." We can prove the cover-up. The last remnants of Martha's exhaustion seemed to burn away, replaced by the white-hot determination of a woman who had been gaslighted for weeks. "Tell me the name of your lawyer," she said, her voice now steady and resolute. "I want them to know every single thing that Dr. C did." I took Matt's hand and squeezed it hard. The terrifying isolation of the ICU had fractured my family, but now, the truth we found there was uniting us with another family broken by the system's lies. The true fight for justice, and the complete exposure of the hospital's darkest confessions, was finally in motion. Connecting Martha L. with Eleanor was the most satisfying action we'd taken since I was discharged. It shifted the entire landscape of our legal battle. The dental clinic negligence was our hammer, but Tom L., his case was the smoking gun aimed directly at the heart of the hospital's culture of concealment. Eleanor was ecstatic. She immediately prepared motions to legally connect our two cases, arguing that both demonstrated a systemic pattern of neglect and cover-up by St. Jude's Hospital and its associated medical professionals. Meanwhile, my physical recovery was slow and agonizingly boring. I was stuck on the couch, tethered to the house, but my mind was sharper than ever. I spent my days reviewing the hospital timeline, trying to recall every detail that could help Tom L.'s case. Matt, the reluctant hero, was now completely immersed in the fight. He set up a secure line of communication with Martha and Eleanor. Martha L. signed a retainer agreement, Matt announced one morning, looking relieved. Eleanor is moving fast. She's filing an emergency motion to secure Tom's medical records before St. Jude's legal team can scrub them clean. Good, I responded, pushing myself up to a sitting position, feeling the familiar ache in my chest. But what about Mr. Peterson, the old man whose chart they falsified? His family needs to know too. Matt sighed, pouring himself another coffee. That one is the hardest, Sarah. It's a minor error, a timing mistake, on an elderly, nonverbal patient. No lawyer is going to touch it. It has no major damages attached, and it's pure hearsay. But it proves the culture, I insisted. It proves they lie about small things to protect themselves, which leads to them lying about big things, like what happened to Tom. I couldn't shake the memory of the nurse's casual indifference. It wasn't about the medication timing. It was about the devaluation of a human life deemed too old or too insignificant to warrant accurate paperwork. I went back to the only asset I had left, my memory. I closed my eyes, picturing the ICU, the beeping, the ventilator, the voices. I focused on the curtain separating Mr. Peterson's room from the nurse's station. Maria, the nurse, was scared. The other nurse told her to chart it on time. He only gets visitors on Sundays. Matt, I called out, do you still have the visitor log access for the ICU from 2 weeks ago? I might have taken a few screenshots of the visitor area activity when I was panicking, he admitted, pulling out his old phone. What are you looking for? I need to find the family of Mr. Peterson. If they only visited on Sundays, they might notice discrepancies. We just need to give them a nudge, anonymously. Matt, skeptical but unwilling to deny me, spent the next hour cross-referencing visitor names from the Sunday logs against local public records. He found a woman, a granddaughter, Jane P., listed as a regular Sunday visitor. This time, Matt didn't call. We didn't want to alert the hospital with another sudden contact. Instead, Matt drafted a meticulous, anonymous letter. It didn't accuse the hospital of wrongdoing. It simply stated, "Please review your grandfather, Mr. Peterson's medication administration chart very closely for the dates, specific dates of the ICU stay. Specifically, verify the exact time of the 10 p.m. dose. Trust your instincts." Sending this is dangerous, Matt whispered, sealing the envelope. If the hospital tracks this back to us, they'll bury Tom's case under layers of defamation. Then we make sure they can't track it, I said, my heart pounding. We send it, and then we let Eleanor destroy the dental clinic, which will distract them completely. The moment the letter was mailed, an anonymous tip into the vast, indifferent machine of the hospital felt like the final, defiant act of my captivity. I was no longer just the patient who fought the drugs. I was the person who carried the hospital's conscience outside its walls. Now, all we could do was wait for the dominoes to fall. The legal fight against the dentist was about to launch, and somewhere in the city, an elderly man's granddaughter was about a week away from receiving a very unsettling, anonymous letter. The launch of the lawsuit against the dental clinic was loud. Eleanor filed the claim, attaching the Department of Health's findings regarding the sterilization violations and the microbiology lab's report confirming the Pseudomonas aeruginosa strain. It immediately hit the local news. The clinic's response was predictable, a statement expressing shock and claiming they had already resolved the minor maintenance issues found by the inspector. But the damage was done. The headline was about a near-fatal septic shock linked to dental negligence. Matt was on fire. He was fielding media inquiries and ensuring every detail that could possibly point back to the St. Jude's internal corruption was kept completely out of the public eye. For now, our strategy was to let the dental case create a massive distraction. My recovery, meanwhile, was painfully slow. I was off oxygen, but the crushing fatigue remained. The physical therapy was brutal, every session forcing me to acknowledge the permanent structural changes the sepsis had wrought. Frank, my therapist, was pushing me to walk further each day. "Don't let the fatigue win, Sarah," he insisted, spotting my struggle as I held onto the rail. "It's a mind game now. Your muscles need to remember how to live." I used the image of Ms. Davies's smug face and the memory of the young doctor's arrogance as my motivation. I was fighting to be strong enough to appear in court, strong enough to look them in the eye. A few days after the dental lawsuit went public, Matt received the inevitable response from St. Jude's. "Risk management," Matt announced, holding up an official-looking envelope, his expression unreadable. "It's a formal letter in response to our concerns about the care you received." He opened it and scanned the contents. They're confirming that, as a gesture of goodwill, they are waiving all out-of-pocket costs related to your care. They also state that any claims regarding the facility's internal protocols or specific patient outcomes are unfounded allegations by a patient who experienced a lengthy period of drug-induced delirium during critical care. And they're using the sedation against us, just like Eleanor predicted. "Unfounded," I scoffed, leaning forward on the sofa. The audacity. "And here's the kicker," Matt continued, his voice tight with controlled anger. "They mentioned that they reviewed the logs for the endoscopic procedure and found no documentation of any surgical error or adverse event related to new equipment." The doctor covered his tracks perfectly. The lie was now officially institutionalized. My memory, my terrifying life-saving memory, was officially labeled a hallucination. The frustration was almost unbearable. "Tom L's case is our only way around this," I said, my voice sharp. "They can't call him delirious. What did Eleanor find in his files?" "We got a partial win," Matt replied. "Eleanor secured the initial admission logs before the hospital could redact everything. The records confirm he was in for a routine checkup, that the complication happened on the table, and he was transferred immediately. The notes blame adhesions, but the timeline of the emergency transfer is suspicious. It all points back to Dr. C's confession. We were getting closer to the truth, inch by agonizing inch. The fight was slow, messy, and dependent on proving that the quiet lies I overheard were part of a pattern. Then, late that Sunday evening, Matt got a short, cryptic text message on his old phone, the one he'd used to send the anonymous tip. The message was from an unknown number. It read simply, "JP says thank you. The 10 p.m. dose was charted, but the nurse who gave it signed the log 3 hours later. They lied about the Sunday visit too. You were right." Matt stared at the phone, his face paling slightly. "JP, Jane Peterson, the granddaughter." I reached out and took his hand. "The Mr. Peterson confession was real," I whispered. "That's 2 lies confirmed. The one that was too small to matter, and the one that was too big to ignore. Matt, we have proof of the culture now. The entire culture of silence is real. The anonymous letter had worked. The tiny, seemingly harmless lie was now exposed, linking the small-scale carelessness of the nursing staff directly to the large-scale cover-up of the surgeons. The hospital was running out of shadows to hide in. The text message about Mr. Peterson was a psychological victory more powerful than any legal document. It was validation. It proved, definitively, that my consciousness, trapped and distorted by drugs, had accurately intercepted a factual cover-up. The hospital couldn't dismiss me as delusional anymore. I was a witness to their systemic rot. Matt immediately relayed the cryptic message to Eleanor. "This is huge, Sarah," Eleanor confirmed, her voice crackling with excitement over the phone. "It shows a pattern of falsifying records for institutional convenience. We can't file a lawsuit on Mr. Peterson's behalf without his family. but we can use this as evidence of modus operandi in Tom L's case. It undermines the hospital's entire defense. The focus now shifted entirely to Tom L. and the endoscopic stapler incident. Eleanor's strategy was to link the dental negligence, the proven infection source, with the hospital's internal concealment. My testimony, backed by the Peterson tip-off, and Tom's suspicious records. My recovery continued, slow and frustrating. I was walking, but my energy was depleted by mid-morning. It was hard to reconcile the intense, almost supernatural clarity of my mind during the ICU stay with the current physical sluggishness. One afternoon, Matt received a call from a familiar, dreaded number, Risk Management, Ms. Davies. He put the phone on speaker, looking at me for confirmation. I nodded, wanting to hear the corporate maneuvering firsthand. Mr. T. Ms. Davies' voice was smooth, but laced with new urgency. I'm calling regarding your complaint about the dental facility. While St. Jude's is not responsible for the actions of external providers, we understand the distress this has caused. The hospital is now prepared to offer a significantly enhanced settlement package to cover all your medical expenses, pain, and suffering, and loss of consortium. Loss of consortium? Matt repeated flatly. You mean the fact that my wife nearly died and I had to listen to doctors talk about turning off the machines? Ms. Davies ignored the barb. The total offer is substantial, Mr. T. It requires signing a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement regarding your wife's care at St. Jude's and any subsequent legal actions against the hospital or its affiliates. She wasn't just trying to pay off the dental negligence anymore. She was trying to buy the silence regarding Tom L's case and my confessions. The hospital was running scared. Ms. Davies, Matt said, his voice calm. My wife is right here. Why don't you talk to her? There was a noticeable silence on the line. Ms. Davies clearly hadn't expected me to be listening. Sarah, she finally said, her tone hardening. This is a generous offer that resolves all future uncertainty. I urge you to consider the immense stress litigation will place on your recovery. This would allow you to focus on your health. I took a deep breath, feeling the air fill my lungs. A powerful, conscious effort. Ms. Davies, I said, my voice still weak, but firm with conviction. I appreciate the concern for my health, but my health requires justice. You're not offering this money for the Pseudomonas. You're offering it for the doctor who paralyzed Tom L. and lied about scar tissue. You're offering it for the nurses who falsified the chart of Mr. Peterson. You're offering it to cover up the culture of negligence. The line was dead silent. I had named their secrets. We aren't taking the money, I continued, feeling a rush of vindication, and we aren't going to be silent. The confessions I heard in the ICU are going to be public. You can call them delirium, but we have the evidence to prove you lie about the small things, and you lie about the big things. Have a good day, Ms. Davies. I nodded to Matt, and he pressed the end call button. We sat there for a moment, breathing in the quiet of our living room. We had just turned down enough money to erase our debt, simply to ensure the truth saw the light. We just went all in, Matt said, a smile slowly spreading across his face. Good, I replied, leaning my head against his shoulder, because I'm not done fighting the hospital yet. The moment we rejected the hospital's settlement offer, the legal pace accelerated from a steady jog to a full sprint. Eleanor officially filed the motion to consolidate the dental clinic case with the emergent evidence from Tom L's case, arguing that St. Jude's was directly liable for its staff's negligence and subsequent cover-up. The hospital's response was a flurry of motions designed to bury us in paperwork. They demanded an independent psychological evaluation of me, reiterating the claim that my testimony was generated during a period of pharmacological confusion. They're trying to discredit you before you ever set foot in a deposition room, Matt warned, looking stressed but determined. They'll try to paint you as hysterical or permanently damaged by the sepsis. We need to be ready. The thought of being interrogated about my sanity was infuriating. I had fought for my mind to stay tethered, fought the very drugs they used to keep me quiet, and now they were using those same drugs as a shield for their lies. I spent the next week preparing for the psych evaluation with Eleanor. We rehearsed the events, focusing on the rational clarity of the memories, and how they were later independently verified by Matt and the anonymous tip about Mr. Peterson. Your memory of Matt saying let her go is actually your strongest point, Sarah, Eleanor advised. It proves your consciousness was fighting to survive despite the drugs. Your survival itself is the counter-evidence to their delirium claim. The day of the evaluation was tense. The psychiatrist was cold, clinical, and asked probing questions about my emotional stability, my relationship with Matt, and any history of mental illness. I answered honestly, maintaining a calm, factual tone, focusing only on the observations I made while semi-conscious. I described the sounds of the ventilator, the cold pressure of the intubation tube, the distinct voice of the doctor bragging about the endoscopic stapler incident. When I finished, the psychiatrist gave nothing away. "Thank you, Sarah. We will submit our findings to the court." The waiting was agonizing, but the psychological war wasn't the only one we were fighting. The physical recovery reached a plateau. My energy was stagnant. Frank, the physical therapist, noticed my struggle. "You're stuck in survival mode, Sarah," he observed during a quiet moment. "The body remembers the trauma. Every deep breath feels like a threat, because the last time you took one, you were fighting for your life. We need to reset that fear." He started incorporating breathing exercises that focused less on physical capacity and more on mental relaxation. He had me imagine I was breathing in safety and breathing out the tension of the ICU. It was cheesy, but it worked. I started to let go of the rigid control I had maintained since I heard Matt's betrayal. I stopped focusing only on the fight and started embracing the healing. A week later, Eleanor called with the results of the evaluation. "It's a win," she announced, barely containing her excitement. "The psychiatrist found you to be lucid, credible, and exhibiting remarkable recall inconsistent with pervasive drug-induced psychosis. The key was the independent verification of the external facts. They can't use the delirium defense anymore." A wave of relief and pure vindication washed over me, stronger than any medication. They couldn't silence me. They couldn't invalidate the trauma. "Now," Eleanor said, her voice dropping to a serious tone, "it's time for the hard part. Tom L. His family is ready to join the lawsuit, but we need you to face the doctor who nearly killed Tom and who tried to silence you. Dr. C," I said, the name finally having a face attached to the arrogant voice I overheard. "Yes, we are scheduling the first deposition. You will be sitting across the table from him. Are you ready to confront the truth you risked your life to uncover?" I looked at my hands, thin and still bearing the faint marks of the IV lines. I wasn't just ready. This was the moment I had fought the drugs, the fever, and my own body to reach. "Tell Eleanor I'll be there," I told Matt. "I want to look him in the eye when I tell his story." The day of the deposition against Dr. C felt like the final brutal session of physical therapy. It was the emotional and mental equivalent of walking 20 miles on lungs that were still scarred. Matt drove me to the law office building downtown. My energy was meticulously rationed for the task ahead. Eleanor met us downstairs. She was dressed impeccably, her composure radiating authority. "Remember the goal, Sarah," Eleanor instructed quietly as we rode the elevator up. "You are not there to argue. You are there to state the facts of what you heard, calmly and credibly. You are the impartial witness to their internal corruption." The deposition room was small, sterile, and cold. It felt like a corporate operating theater. A court reporter sat ready. On the opposite side of the long table sat Dr. C, flanked by 2 lawyers from the hospital's defense team. Dr. C was exactly as I had imagined him from his arrogant, whispered confession. Young, immaculate, and radiating a smug sense of entitlement. He avoided my gaze entirely. His presence, his physical reality, hit me with a jolt of pure, cold anger. This was the man who had concealed a mistake that destroyed a family, and then lied about it to protect his expensive new toy and his career. Eleanor began the questioning, focusing first on the confirmed facts. My stay at St. Jude's, the septic shock, the Pseudomonas source, and the hospital's subsequent offer of silence. Then she transitioned into the memories from the sedation period. "Ms. T," Eleanor asked, her voice clear, "while you were intubated in the ICU, did you overhear any conversations regarding surgical procedures or errors?" "Yes," I replied, my voice steady, though still slightly hoarse. I kept my eyes fixed on Dr. C, forcing him to acknowledge my presence. "Please describe, in detail, the conversation you overheard involving Dr. C." I recounted the scene. The late hour, the doctor leaning against the sink, the complaint about the endoscopic stapler, the rush job, the fear that he had nicked something, and the final damning line. I covered it up in the summary, blamed it on pre-existing scar tissue. As I spoke, The defense lawyers scribbled furiously. Dr. C, however, finally looked up. His expression was a practiced mask of professional offense, but there was a flicker of panic deep in his eyes. When it was the defense attorney's turn, the attack was immediate and brutal. Ms. T, you admit you were receiving a cocktail of powerful sedative and narcotic drugs during this time, correct? The attorney, a sharp-featured woman, asked aggressively. Yes. Drugs that can cause vivid, complex, and completely false hallucinations, correct? I was not hallucinating. I was conscious and observed a real event. But you couldn't move or speak, Ms. T. You believe you were lucidly interpreting a conversation while your body was paralyzed and your brain was swimming in narcotics? I believe the facts I observed were real, I stated, repeating Eleanor's training. And those facts, the scar tissue explanation, and the sudden, permanent paralysis of the patient, were independently proven true by the patient's records and family testimony. I threw Tom L's plight into the room. Dr. C visibly winced, finally looking away. The attorney pushed back hard. And the other conversation, the charting error you claim to have overheard? You believe you have some supernatural ability to perceive the internal minutiae of the nursing station while fighting for your life? No, I said, meeting her gaze calmly. I believe the nurse's subsequent actions, her anonymous warning to us, proved that the conversation was factual and that the hospital culture is to conceal errors. I didn't just give them my story. I gave them the proof of the Peterson confirmation. The deposition dragged on for hours, a grueling interrogation designed to break my composure. But I held fast. I was no longer the frightened woman fighting for a flicker of life. I was the guardian of the hospital's conscience. Finally, the defense attorney, seeing that she couldn't shake my factual account, ended her questioning with a sneer. We maintain that this entire account is a fictional narrative created to support an opportunistic lawsuit. Thank you, Miss T. As the lawyers gathered their papers, Dr. C quickly gathered his own, trying to bolt for the door. But I was faster. I pushed my chair back, stood up, and looked directly at him. He froze. Dr. C, I said, my voice quiet, but carrying the weight of everything I'd endured. The man you hurt was Tom L. He's paralyzed. He's not scar tissue. And I heard you. He didn't respond. He just stared at the floor, his face pale and dripping with sweat. The arrogance finally stripped away. Without a word, he turned and hurried out of the room, fleeing the truth I had brought out of the darkness. The fight was far from over, but for the first time I felt the satisfying, deep exhaustion of a witness who had finally been heard. Leaving the deposition room felt like emerging from a torture chamber. The relief of having faced Dr. C and uttered the truth out loud was immense, but the subsequent exhaustion hit me full force. I leaned on Matt, feeling weaker than I had during any physical therapy session. You were incredible, Sarah, Matt whispered, putting his arm around my waist. You dismantled their defense. They have no way to deny his panic. Eleanor met us in the hallway, beaming. The deposition was everything I hoped for. He avoided eye contact, and his panic when you mentioned Tom L. and the scar tissue is documented in the record. Legally, your testimony is no longer just the word of a sedated patient. It's the leverage we needed to unlock Tom L.'s files. The focus now was on achieving a settlement for Tom L. Matt, and Eleanor worked tirelessly with Martha L. to use the threat of public exposure, and Eleanor's fearless deposition, to force the hospital's hand. The hospital's fear of having their culture of cover-up exposed in a high-profile lawsuit was palpable. Press coverage of the dental clinic case had already put the public on alert. A scandal involving paralysis and falsified records would be catastrophic. 2 weeks later, the hospital made a counteroffer. They're sweating, Eleanor announced on a video call. Their proposal is split. First, the dental clinic offers a significant sum to cover your damages and Matt's loss of consortium, without admitting fault. That money resolves your external negligence claim. And the hospital's part? I asked, sitting in our war room, feeling the adrenaline return. The hospital proposes settling Tom L.'s case with a substantial multi-million-dollar agreement, which will secure his long-term care for the rest of his life. It's a value that cannot be refused, Sarah. It's enough to cover 24/7 care and specialized treatment. What's the catch? Matt asked, tense. Eleanor hesitated. They demand a comprehensive NDA surrounding all records and testimony related to Dr. C and the endoscopic stapler incident. Tom L. and Martha L. would have to sign it. and they require you and Matt to sign a secondary agreement to maintain silence about any hallway conversations you may have overheard, including Mr. Peterson. It was the ultimate dilemma: full justice versus the truth. The settlement would provide Martha the financial security she needed for her husband, but it would mean that Dr. C and the nurses who falsified the records would never be publicly named. The hospital would buy their silence once again. I looked at Matt. He was exhausted, but the fire was still in his eyes. "We got what we needed for Tom L.," Matt said slowly. "His security is what Martha needs. We can't risk his life just to make a statement about a cultural process." "But what about Dr. C?" I insisted. "He just gets away with it? And the others?" "He doesn't get away with it," Eleanor interjected. "While the hospital can silence the parties, I assure you that his internal record and the risk of being named in a lawsuit have done irreparable damage to his career and the hospital's record. I can promise you, Doctor, C will not be using the endoscopic stapler again, and the hospital will have to answer internally for what happened." The choice was clear: the personal vengeance of publicly exposing the truth, or the financial protection of the man whose life was ruined. "We accept the settlement for Tom L.," I said, feeling a pang of sorrow. "He deserves security, but we demand that part of Tom L. His settlement includes the hospital investing a significant sum into an anonymous fund to support patient safety at St. Jude's, overseen by an external organization. It was our way of ensuring the hospital paid for its silence, not just with money, but with a measure of forward-facing accountability. The hospital agreed. The settlement was signed. The final document I signed was my own. The money from the dental clinic would resolve my medical bills and give us some breathing room. The hospital's agreement sealed me into silence regarding everything I overheard. When the last document was signed and sent, I felt a deep, paradoxical exhaustion. I had fought death to tell the truth, and now my prize was money, security, and silence. Matt hugged me tightly. "You saved 2 families, Sarah. You saved your life and Tom L.'s security. You won." He was right. The fight in the ICU taught me that life is too short for resignation. I had fought for my life, my marriage, and the truth. The truth was salvaged, even if the healthcare system had done what it always did: silence it with money. The final confession was not from Dr. C or the nurse. It was my own. I had to accept that justice in the real world often comes wrapped in bureaucracy and NDAs, but that survival is, in itself, the purest form of triumph. I was home, healed, and my voice was permanently strong, even if legally muzzled. The hospital was silenced, the money was wired, and the legal battle was over. Life, in its messy, beautiful, overwhelming way, began again. The weeks that followed were defined by routine: school drop-offs, physical therapy, and the slow, arduous process of reclaiming my strength. The physical scars were fading, but the invisible ones, the memory of the tube, the fear of the beeping monitors, the shadow of Matt's surrender, remained. Matt and I were closer than ever, forged in the heat of near tragedy and shared purpose. The betrayal I had overheard in the ICU, the moment he gave up on me, had ceased to be a wound and had become a foundation. He knew my fighter's heart now, and I knew the crushing weight of his fear. We spoke about everything, rebuilding our connection on raw, honest vulnerability. Our victory wasn't in a courtroom verdict, but in the quiet, tangible results of our fight. The dental clinic remained under intense scrutiny and was permanently placed on probation, and the money secured for Tom L. meant Martha could focus on his comfort, not his bills. One afternoon, months after the settlement, I was finally strong enough to take the kids to the local park, a true benchmark of recovery. As the children played on the swings, Matt and I sat on a bench, watching them. "Eleanor called this morning," Matt said quietly, handing me a water bottle. "About what?" I asked, my heart immediately jumping. I still felt tethered to the fight. The anonymous patient safety fund. St. Jude's had to allocate a huge sum, and they've been forced to comply with several external oversight mandates. Eleanor's contact confirmed that the administration has initiated a massive internal audit of all surgical complications from the past year. I let out a slow, deep breath, the air filling my newly strong lungs. "They're auditing the endoscopic stapler," I realized. "They're looking for other errors." "Exactly," Matt confirmed, a look of profound satisfaction on his face. "The legal agreement forced them to put up a wall of silence against us, but it forced them to internally clean house. Dr. C is reportedly under investigation and is on indefinite leave. Mr. Peterson's care logs were corrected as part of the broader compliance review. They couldn't ignore the pattern, Sarah. Your confessions, verified by Tom L's plight, broke their system. I looked at my children, laughing as they flew high toward the sky. I hadn't received public justice, but I had achieved something deeper, systemic change born from an overheard truth. The real win, I said, leaning my head against Matt's shoulder, is that the next person who goes in for a routine procedure at St. Jude's, or the next family member struggling to believe the complication story, will be protected. They won't have to fight a conspiracy alone. Matt put his arm around me, squeezing gently. You fought them all, honey. The bacteria, the drugs, the doctors, the lawyers, and me. You saved your own life, and you saved their integrity. My recovery wasn't measured in lost weight or healed scars, but in the return of a fierce, unshakable conviction. The near-death experience stripped away every triviality and left me with a clear, singular purpose: to live fully and honestly. The last confession I made was to myself. I accepted that I was forever changed, not diminished by the trauma, but amplified by the fight. The silence the hospital bought was meaningless. My voice was strong, my family was whole, and the truth I wrestled from the edge of death was now hard at work, correcting the shadows I had briefly inhabited. I smiled, finally able to breathe easily, completely free from the ghosts of the ICU.